Hello and welcome to numbers 81 to 90 in my top 100 Spectrum games countdown. My number 90 game is Frenzy. Frenzy was released in 1982 by Quicksilver and it was a really early Berserk clone and was also one of the very first games I played. So the first two games I played were Attic Attack and Spectral Panic, and those were the games that I got with my Spectrum back in 1983, and this was a game that my cousin got with his Spectrum in the same year. And we used to go to his house, and in those early days you didn't have a lot of games to play, so we played this a huge amount. Now, those of you who watch the Spectrum show will know that the Berserk clones on the Spectrum weren't very good. There were no particularly good ones. But of all the ones that were on the Spectrum, this is one that I liked the most. It had Evil Otto, the evil smiley face who would come and chase you off the screen if you lingered too long. It had different coloured robots that would get you. What it doesn't have, and what makes Berserk great, is the sounds of the robots talking. Come back and fight like a robot, for example, in Berserk the robots say in the arcade game. But this was still a great little game, and for two young boys who'd only recently got their Spectrums and hadn't played them very much, this was absolutely excellent. It was a fun little game. It's a good score attack game. Getting a high score in it is pretty difficult but achievable. So playing it and trying to get the best score you can, one after the other, while the other one looks on and shouts encouragement is always good to do. And we didn't spend hours and hours playing it later in the life of the Spectrum. We'd occasionally load it up for nostalgia reasons and play it. And as I've already said before in this list, some games you go back to and you think, oh no, why did I go back to this? This isn't anywhere near as good as I remember. Whereas Frenzy is, because I didn't have particularly high expectations when I went back to it. I knew that it wasn't great. I knew it wasn't as good as Berserk on the arcade, for example. But I have really fond memories of playing it, and I think that counts. That's going to count for a lot in this early part of the list, as it already has. There are some games that are getting into this list just for the sake of nostalgia, and this is definitely one of them. But this is a competent little Berserk clone that I think deserves a little bit of recognition, which is why it's there. So that's my number 90 game, Frenzy. My number 89 game is Fred. Fred was released in 1984 by Quicksilver Software. Now, according to the World of Spectrum site, it was also released by Investortronica in Spain and was actually written by them, so this was a game written in Spain. Now, I'm no expert on Spanish games, but I've been told that a lot of games that were written in Spain were really difficult. Now, that's not really true of this game. I actually really like this game because it's got quite a nice level of difficulty. It's not too hard and not too easy. But I think one of the classics that I'm sure was written in Spain was Game Over, and if anyone's ever played Game Over, it is really difficult. I used to think that it was called Game Over because basically it was game over almost as soon as you started. Now, this is another game that I used to play with my cousin. There's quite a few on this list, especially the early ones that I used to play with my cousin. He had this and we used to go around there and play it. And like Frenzy, we just take turns playing it and seeing how far we could get. Now, in the game, you play the hero Fred, and you've been trapped in a pyramid or a tomb in Egypt. And what you have to do is find your way out of the tomb by getting to level 0, i.e. up from where you are to either the top of the pyramid or the top of the tomb in ground level, and find your way out. Now, to do this, there's a few things that help you. There's ropes that you can climb up, you have a gun with a limited amount of ammunition, and you can find extra things to help you on the way, health and treasure. The treasure doesn't actually help you, but does give you some extra points, including a bonus if you manage to find your way out of the tomb. One thing I didn't realise until a few years ago was on the Amstrad CPC, this game was released as Roland on the Ropes. I think it was in an edition of Retro Gamer magazine where they were doing an article on the Amstrad CPC and the games that were released by, was it Amsoft, the Amstrad software label, and those games invariably had a hero called Roland, and this game was released for the CPC as Roland on the Ropes. Now, I don't know if it was Roland on the Ropes first before it was Fred, or Fred before it was Roland on the Ropes. My guess would be it was Fred first. Now, 1984 was still quite early in the Spectrum's life. I think it came out around the same time as Jet Set Willy. And this game is pretty good for an early game. It has large sprites, and I think games with really large sprites didn't really start to appear until later in the Spectrum's life. The animation's good. It's a bit jerky, it's character-based, but it doesn't flicker. The baddies are all well animated and well drawn. Fred's really well drawn. He looks really good, very cartoony. The baddies that you get some ghosts. Now, the ghosts tend to look like a bone with a sheet thrown over it. They can kind of have two bumps at the top, like the classic cartoon bone shape. There are little lizard things that run up and down the inside of the vertical passageways that get in your way as you're climbing up the ropes. They're pretty well done. There are what look like hedgehogs that run along the floor, and you have to jump over them, and jumping's quite difficult. You have to get the jump just right to jump over them. And they're not on the first level, but after the first level you get mummies to chase after you. Now, the good thing about the mummies, or the thing that's different to the ghosts, is when you shoot a bullet at a ghost, it just changes direction. With the mummies, if you actually shoot it with a bullet, it completely destroys it. So that's my number 89 game, Fred. My number 88 game is Finders Keepers. Finders Keepers was released in 1985 by Mastertronic Limited. And I think for many, Finders Keepers was the first $1.99 Mastertronic game that was really any good. Certainly on the Spectrum. The only other one I can think of that might have been earlier that was a good game was BMX Racers. It was written by David Jones, who went on to write the rest of the Magic Knight trilogy, and Ray Owens. Now, this is an interesting game. It's the first of the Magic Knight games, and Magic Knight doesn't look like he does in the rest of the Magic Knight games. He's slightly more squat, and it doesn't have that windowed control system that the rest of the Magic Knight games have. Windmation, I think David called it. I actually think it's all the better for it. I really like this game. I bought this. I remember going into a shop that had one of those Mastertronic boards up where you got a board of Mastertronic games and had all different games, and invariably there'd be a few missing. So there was a board pinned to the wall of a shop with various games in it, and you would just have a look, see if any caught your eye. And I think I'd seen the review of this in Crash Magazine and thought, actually that looks pretty good. I think I'll buy that. I remember it having a good review. And taking it back home and firing up and playing it for ages and ages and ages. And it's the example of a really good early arcade adventure. The story behind this game is a typical kind of made-up story for a computer game. The king of Ibizimia has transported you to the castle of Spiritland so that you can find a present for his daughter. And if you do that, you'll be rewarded by being allowed to join the Polygon table. And the instructions for the game actually say you have two choices. You can collect as many treasures as you can and just try and escape, or collect the treasure and return to the king. Now, I must admit, while I bought this game and did it, I have never completed the game. It may be one that I revisit and have a look at. I did have a load of fun going around the game when I first started. I remember finding a Philosopher's Stone and turning the lead into gold pretty much on my first or second game, and that made me think, oh wow, this is a good game, and it looks pretty easy as well. And you can trade as well, so when you get the gold you can trade that for a load of cash. Now, this is an arcade adventure, but it's also a bit of a platform game. You've got to jump around quite a few of the platforms and avoid the nasties. You have an amount of energy that goes down when you collide with the baddies, and there are platform sections where you have to jump from one platform to another to get to places where you can collect new objects. So it's kind of an arcade adventure come platform game, and it's all the better for it. And for $1.99, you've got to remember this game was $1.99. It was absolutely fantastic value at the time, particularly when you remember some of the really bad games that came from Mastertronic. Now, reading some of the playing tips that are on Tip Shop for this game, apparently what you need to do to escape is blow up the poor cat. And to do this, you just get the 3 ingredients you need for gunpowder, so sulphur, saltpeter and charcoal, put them all together, drop a magic flame on them, and boom, the muggy gets it. Now, as I said, I've never actually completed this game, but reading those tips, what I think I'm going to do is, after I've finished this, go and have a try. So that's my number 88 game, Finders Keepers. My number 87 game is Mad Martha. As with split personalities in the previous listing, I'm not going to say a lot about this game for reasons which will become apparent to most of you. What I thought I'd do instead is talk about a slightly different game, which is Mad Martha 2, which was the sequel to Mad Martha. Now, like Mad Martha 2 was released in 1983 by Microgen and written by Chris Evans. And it is an incredibly similar game. In fact, Mad Martha 2 appears to be Mad Martha just rewritten. In the first game, your role was Mad Martha's husband, and you had to try and get out on the town and have a good time without Mad Martha discovering and killing you with an axe. In Mad Martha 2, you're on holiday, Martha's gone off, and you have to meet up with your secret Spanish pen pal, and at the start of the game, a waiter brings you a letter soaked in perfume, and you have to meet up with whoever your pen pal is and have some fun. Now, I must admit, trying for about half an hour to work out how to play this game and eventually going to Tip Shop and having a look there. And when I did, I managed to get to the point where you can read a letter. And that letter says, "Dear Jeff, please meet me at my villa this evening. Be sure to wear a red rose so that I will know you. All my love, Chiquita." Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I am wondering if Al Lowe played this game before he invented Leisure Suit Larry. Because you have to admit, when you look at this game, you either start thinking, there are obvious similarities, and of course Mad Martha 2 came well before Leisure Suit Larry. Now, Mad Martha 2, as I said, is pretty similar to Mad Martha. The story's different, and when the content that I'm recording for Mad Martha becomes available, I will put a link to it from here. But Mad Martha or Mad Martha 2 are both games that are well worth picking up and having a look at. If you like Spectrum adventures, well, if you like any adventures, and even if you don't, they're worth having a look at. They're a bit different. This isn't your usual adventure where you're either in a sci-fi setting or a wizards and dragons and warriors with swords type setting. This is just something a bit different and a bit fun. So that's my number 87 game, Mad Martha, and I'd include in that Mad Martha 2. My number 86 game is Robocop. Robocop was released in 1988 by Ocean Software. Now, I don't think I played it on the original release. I think it was released on a compilation and I played it on that. Looking at the World of Spectrum website, there was a compilation called the Hollywood Collection, and I actually think that I got it on that sometime later in the Spectrum's life. Now, by 1988, I really stopped playing computer games. I was at that age where I discovered girls and had other things that I was doing other than playing games, so I didn't play a lot of games. And this was another summer game for me. I think I got it one summer and I remember playing it quite late at night. Now, one thing about the Spectrum is it has the colour attribute hardware architecture that means that you only have 8x8 pixel blocks that can be any one particular colour, or two colours. You have the foreground and the background colour. And various games get over that in various different ways. So some games, like the Wally Week games, just seem to ignore it and you get colour clash everywhere. Some games try and take a very clever way of doing that and avoid colour clash in a clever way. I'd say Rex is one of them. And some games, like a lot of the later games in the Spectrum's life, get around that by just being monochrome. And Robocop is one of those monochrome games, but it still looks good actually. I think the Robocop sprite looks really, really, really good. Now, one of the strange things about Robocop is that it actually feels a bit sluggish. Your sprite doesn't move particularly quickly. That's completely in keeping with the film. It's actually the right thing to do for Robocop because that's how you want it to be. You want him to be slow because he's actually quite slow in the game. You have an energy bar, and I actually think it's quite generous going back and playing the game now. And one of the good things about this game is it has that Ocean thing that they did where they mixed different game styles within this, or within different games. So you've got a side-scrolling shooter basically, where you have to go along, avoid bullets and kill the various enemies. And I must say, going back to it now, some of the enemies are quite difficult to kill. The guys with the chainsaws in particular seem difficult. I remember playing this back in the day that there was a pattern you could learn. You could learn that you walk for so long, then shoot up, and then walk a bit further and shoot along. And there are various different bullets that you can pick up that improve your gun. That means you can kill the enemies with a single shot. Getting those is a terrific boon. And when you get to the end of the section, you go into the bit from the film where there's the guy using the woman as a human shield. Now, for those who remember the film, you'll remember that Robocop takes him out with a single shot. In this game, you can't take him out with a single shot. As he moves left and right and exposes various amounts of himself past the woman, you have to shoot him and avoid shooting her. And I like the way that it does it. If you shoot her, your energy goes down, which can make it really, really difficult. But I remember when I first got to this, I just shot her loads of times, and as you practice and do it more, it gets easier and easier, and actually you find you can do this quite easily. Later in the game, I remember there's a kind of photo fit. You have a timer where you've got to photo fit the baddie. I think it's the same one in the film that actually was using the woman as a human shield, using various photo fit options, and you've got to do that in a time limit in the game, otherwise I think you lose a life. So that mix up of different genres, different styles of game, kept this game interesting. Now, I never completed this back in the day. It's another one that I never completed. I got as far as Ed 209. I remember trying to kill Ed 209 being really, really difficult. And it took so long to get there that I think I got to him 4 or 5 times whenever I played this game, but he was so hard to get past. I think I just gave up, and that was the end of my playing this game. Strangely enough, going back to it now, you probably use save states, so you could practice that a lot more. And I guess by 1988 there were various devices, such as the multi-face one, that would let you actually take save states of games and practice them like that. But still, it's good. I went back to it, I played it a bit, and I enjoyed it. It's a good game. I remember playing it back in the day. It's limited. It's not something that I'm going to go back to and play a lot these days, but I did enjoy playing it, and I do remember really enjoying playing it and getting into it back in the day. So that's my number 86 game, Robocop. My number 85 game is Styx. Styx is another early game. It was released in 1983 by Bugbyte, and to my knowledge is Matthew Smith's first game on the ZX Spectrum, and this would run on a 16K ZX Spectrum, so it's quite a small game. And it's really, really simple and really easy, but looking at it now, there are some Matthew Smithisms already in there. One thing I'd say is that the sprites are really, really well drawn and really, really well animated. There's some flicker in there, so Matthew probably hadn't got quite as good at animating sprites as he did in some of his later games. Certainly it doesn't look as good or as polished as Manic Miner. It's a single screen game that's broken into 3 different areas. The top area of the screen is a little bit of a maze, and in the top right hand corner there's a spider, a big spider, that lets out smaller spiders. It kind of gives birth to smaller spiders, and they chase after you and try and kill you. If they touch you, they kill you. Then once you get through that maze, there is a water area where there are deadly fish, piranha-like fish, that will kill you if you come into contact with those. Then in the last area, there's kind of a little chicane to wind your way through, and then there's a big open area, and there are baddies in that move diagonally, and you've got to kill them. And then finally, right at the end, there's a big evil-looking character. He's kind of reminiscent of the Emperor out of the Star Wars films, and you've got to kill him. Now, there's an interesting game mechanic in Styx. There's something that I've not seen used anywhere else before, at least I can't think of it, in that the more you fire, the shorter your laser gets. So you start off and you've got kind of a laser beam, and it's quite long, and the more you fire it, the more you use it in any given run through of the game, the shorter it gets. Once you kill the evil character at the end, the game resets and you go into the top left hand corner with more baddies, and your laser goes back to its original length at that point in time, and you just keep going round and round and round. It's a single screen game. It's really, really easy, especially in the first levels, and as you get more and more baddies, it becomes more and more difficult. Now, one of the interesting things about this game, one of the things that I discovered on this game, it was the first game I ever discovered a leech point. Now, for those of you who don't know what a leech point in a game is, a leech point in a game is a place where you can find a safe spot where you won't be killed, that also allows your your score to keep increasing. So you can just find a point where you're safe and your score keeps going up. So some people may know that in Pac-Man there's a safe spot where you can go to and the ghosts will just keep going round in the same pan and never actually find and eat Pac-Man. That's not a leech point, that's just a safe point, because Pac-Man doesn't get any more points when he's in that position. A good example of a leech point is in Jetpack, where when you get to the level with the kind of planes on it, the fighter jets that home in on you, if you stand on the middle platform in Jetpack, you won't die and the planes will keep crashing into that platform or various platforms, and every time they explode you get some points. So that's a leech point in that your score goes up. In this game there's a leech point because of the way the baddies can kill each other. The baddies can kill each other in this game. If 3 baddies occupy the same point in the game at the same time, the same kind of physical space on the screen, then they kill each other. And of course what happens with this game is it just gets harder and harder and harder by there being more and more sprites on screen the further into the game you get. Now, after the first maze section in the game, that upper maze section, when you go into the water section you kind of close a door. So you go just underneath the big spider in the top right, and when you hit that you close the door, but the game keeps running in the top section. And with the top section, when you kill the baddies, more spawn every single time out of the big spider. As long as you can actually kill the big spider, as long as you don't kill the big spider, more baddies will keep spawning. And of course later in the game, where there are lots and lots and lots of these baddies, then they just start killing each other and keep killing each other, so that's a leech point. And I must admit, when I first found this, I left my Spectrum running, and you just keep getting extra lives. So I think it's for every 10,000 points, and you can just clock up loads and loads and loads of lives in this game. And what happens is they are shown as extra sprites. You get every single life is represented by a sprite that is shown in the bottom right hand section of the screen. And as you keep getting more and more of these extra life sprites actually write onto the screen itself. So if you keep going, you get to the point where your extra men are on the screen itself. And because you've got this leech point, if you just leave it running, they can go all the way across the screen twice, I think, and then they start on the bottom of the screen. Now, modern emulation means that you can do this and, of course, crank up the speed on your emulator and see what to get to. And I think eventually, once you get 256 extra lives, your live counter resets and you've only got the one that's on the screen. So, and it starts building back up again, and all the character sprites are wiped off the screen. But that was the first example of a leech point. That's not the reason the game's in this. I like this game. It's a simple game. I actually go back to this game every now and then. I'll just load it up and play for a little while. Another good game for playing on a handheld. If you played this if you've got a handheld device that can emulate a ZX Spectrum, then it's a really good one to play. I've got a Dingo, and all I really use that for is when I'm travelling, if I'm on a train, sometimes when I'm on a plane, if I'm on bus even. I will take that with me and just get it out and play various Spectrum games while I'm on the bus or the train while I'm travelling, and this is a really, really good one to play. It's a good, quick pick up and play game that you can just get into quite simply. It's nowhere near as good as Matthew Smith's later games, but is a really, really good little game that you can just pick up and play. For a 16K Spectrum game, it's a good game, and was one that was overlooked, I think, back in the day. No one really talks much about Matthew Smith's first game, which for the Spectrum, which this was. So that's my number 85 game, Styx. My number 84 game is Scuba Dive. Scuba Dive was released in 1983 and is a Durell game. So Durell did loads of really, really good games. They were quite good at Spectrum games, especially in the early days. Their most famous probably being Harrier Attack. And in this game you are a scuba diver, and what you have to do is dive down into the depths of the ocean and collect treasure. The way the program scores is quite interesting because you don't actually score any points until you get the treasure back to the boat. That makes sense. So you have two scores, a held score, which says how much treasure you're holding, and a actual score, which is how much you've managed to take back to the boat. And when you first dive, you dive into the shallow sea, and there's some oysters on the bottom of the ocean which you can pick up pearls from and get a small score. I think they're 10 points each. But if you go across the bottom of the ocean floor, you will find an octopus guarding a passageway down into deeper caves, and down there you get really big oysters that have bigger pearls in them which are worth more. But at the bottom of that cave there is another octopus guarding a entrance to even deeper caves. And if you go into those caves you can find more great big oysters, but also treasure chests which hold loads and loads of treasure. Now, one of the things that can happen while you're diving is if you bang into anything, if an oyster closes on you or you bash into the rocks, then you drop everything that you're holding. That can be really, really annoying, especially if you've been right down to the depths and got loads and loads of treasure, and then you're trying to get it back to the boat, and maybe as you come back through past the final octopus you'd bash into the rocks and drop everything. That's happened to me more than once. Now, this ocean isn't unpopulated, it's quite lively. There are loads and loads of things swimming around in it, and contact with any of those will kill you. And there are some huge things in here in the ocean. There are some great big sharks that look really, really quite menacing. There are electric eels. There are just little schools of fish, but they still kill you if you bash into them. And all kinds of different sea life, all of which is pretty much instantly deadly to you. And that includes the octopus that is guarding the entrances to the deeper caverns, as mentioned before. Now, I remember playing this game way, way back in the day. I used to play it quite a lot. It's one of those games that you get and you play it loads and then leave for a while and maybe go back to and play it once or twice. And I don't really go back to playing it now. It's not something I go back to now very often, but occasionally I'll fire it up just to have a go on it and a play, just for nostalgia's sake. I guess this is another one of those games that is in this list for nostalgia reasons rather than anything else. It's pretty simple. Probably the only thing of the game mechanic I haven't mentioned is the oxygen. You have an ever-depleting supply of oxygen which you can refill in oxygen tanks which you find in some of the deeper caves, which can be very, very useful actually. If you don't do that, you really run out of air quite quickly. I think this was one of the games that my neighbour had, and we used to swap games, and he'd lend me this one and I'd lend him one of mine, Attic Attack or something like that, in return. And I don't think there's much more to say about it than that. It's a good game. A lot of people will know it. It was quite famous. Well worth a look if you've never played it before, but don't expect huge big things from it. As I say, this is more a nostalgia game for me than one I'd say, yeah, everyone should go out and play again. So that's my number 84 game, Scuba Dive. My number 83 game is Robin of the Wood. Robin of the Wood was released in 1985 by Odin Computers, and Odin did some really, really good games, and this was one of them. It was a tie-in, I think, with the Robin of the Wood TV series that was out at the time, which was actually kind of a modern take. So that TV series showed the more grittier side of kind of Robin Hood and what it would really have been like if Robin Hood was an outlaw back in medieval times. And he would go on various adventures, and it was all a bit mystical and spooky and things like that. And it's strange. I think sometimes we think that kind of modern, more realistic take on some of these older kind of medieval things is quite modern. It started in the 2000s really, but this was something that was out before then and had that take on it. Certainly in the TV series. Now the computer game looks fantastic. The graphics are really, really good, and you are Robin, and you have to run around the forest and find various things that will help you in your quest. You've got to find a bow and arrows. Now, to get the bow, you need to get money, and you get money by finding the bishop, and if you kill his guards, he will drop bags of gold. Now, there is a little problem in that there is an enchantress who inhabits the woods, and if you come across her, and where she is pretty random in the game. There are various clearings you go into where she can appear. If you've got any money, she will take the money off you. However, if you've managed to collect some flowers from the wood, that protects your money. Now, while this is a good game and looks absolutely fantastic, it is flawed in that it takes you a long time to find the bishop, the guy that you get the money off. It is really hard. getting bags of money are few and far between, and when you get the money, I think you buy the boar from the end. That then allows you to go and play in the famous Robin Hood tournament where he wins the silver arrow. But that enchantress appears all too often, and that bishop appears all too little, and I find myself getting really frustrated with this game. I've played it quite a bit, and I played it a lot. We played it a lot back in the day, and enjoyed it. It's really, really good. The animation looks absolutely fantastic. The graphics are terrific. It's one of those games I mentioned earlier. Some games are clever with the way they deal with colour clash, and this is it. You don't get much colour clash, but it is a colourful game. There are various baddies that run around the wood. There are boars that you can't kill and can do a lot of damage to you that you just need to learn to avoid, and then there's soldiers who will shoot their crossbows at you. They can be a bit annoying, but they're not too difficult to avoid and kill. Now, every now and then the Sheriff of Nottingham turns up and he will throw you in his dungeon, but that's essentially just a maze that you have to find your way out of and back into the wood. And there's not much more to the game than that. I think it's in here because it looked good. It's in here because, again, it was a game that I got. I think a friend had it, and we got it and spent a lot of time playing it, figuring out how to do it. I remember trying to draw a map of the wood, and I think it wraps around. I think it wraps around both vertically and horizontally, which makes it quite tricky. But I remember spending a lot of time trying to draw a map of the wood and map it all out and work out where the enchantress was and when she would come along and steal our gold. But eventually, I think we just got frustrated with the fact that your gold keeps going missing and you can never get it. I think these days what I would probably do is use save states to make it a bit easier if I was going to revisit this game. I don't have any particular desire to, though. I don't think I'm going to go back and play this a lot like I am with some of the other games in this list. So that's my number 83 game, Robin of the Wood. My number 82 game is Renegade. Renegade was released in 1987 and was an Imagine game and was an arcade conversion. So Renegade was an arcade game that Ocean converted to the Spectrum, and as with a lot of the arcade conversions that Ocean did, it released it under the Imagine label. Now, putting Renegade in this list feels a little bit cliched because if you go to a lot of lists of best Spectrum games, Renegade is in there. I think a lot of people later in the Spectrum's life really, really enjoyed this and bought this game. And I must admit, I didn't buy it. I think a friend had it. It's one of those games that I played with a friend, and actually, I think I might have had, or the friend had it on a compilation, and we played it loads and loads and loads. Now, I can't remember whether it was this game or Target Renegade. I kind of think it was Renegade rather than Target Renegade we were playing, but I can see why it rates highly in lots of lists of top 100s and top 10s and things like that of Spectrum games. People do rate this game very highly. I can see why. It's really good. It's quite simple. It's kind of a beat 'em up, something similar to something like, I don't know, Golden Axe or Final Fight or something like that. But you don't have a huge amount of moves, but you do have quite a few moves, and you access them using the control system. And really, to master the game, you need to master the control system. And it hits that sweet spot where it's complicated enough to add some interest to the game, but not so complicated and difficult that it's really, really difficult to master. I was never a big Street Fighter 2 fan because I could never master all of those moves and all of the different kind of combos and button combinations that there were to play that. I still can't. I've never been a big fan of beat 'em up games. This was probably the last and most complex beat 'em up game I ever played. I used to love Where the Exploding Fist when that came out, and this was something a bit different to that. It was complex. There were multiple enemies on screen, and it was just something a bit different. And even going back to it now, it actually plays quite well. As I say, that sweet spot between having enough moves, enough complexity for it to be interesting, but not so much it makes it inaccessible or difficult to access. I think it hits quite well. It's not a game that I go back and play now very often. I don't think I'll be playing it for hours and hours and hours like I do some Spectrum games, but it is a good little game, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed going back to it and playing it again, and I remember I enjoyed it a lot back in the day as well. So that's my number 82 game, Renegade. My number 81 game, and the final game in this list, is Rommels Revenge. Rommels Revenge was released in 1983 by Crystal Computing. And I must know I don't know a lot about Crystal Computing. They were obviously one of those early software title companies that went out of business probably in the early days of the Spectrum. Probably a small bedroom coding company that didn't survive the commercialization of software that happened between, 83 and 85 probably. Now, memory, and particularly memory related to things like sounds and smell, is particularly interesting. To this day, if I hear the Space Invaders sound, the dump, dump, dump noise, the kind of heartbeat noise of the Space Invaders machine, I smell chlorine. The first Space Invaders machine I ever saw was in my local leisure centre, and it had a pool, and the whole place smelled of that chlorine pool smell, and just hearing that noise reminds me of that. However, the interesting thing is that if I smell that smell, it reminds me of Battlezone, because after the Space Invaders machine was in there, so my local leisure centre had a Space Invaders machine. We used to go there when we'd play Space Invaders a little bit. But after that, and as arcades and those big arcade machines really started to take off, it got a whole suite of arcade machines. There was one wall and it would have 7 or 8 on that wall, and they'd swap out different ones as new ones came along. And one that was in there, and the one I probably played the most, was Battlezone. It was the one where you stood on and you kind of had the scope to look through when you played, and it was a twin joystick, so you had the joysticks for both the tracks on the tank and you could fire, and I loved that game. I played that loads and loads and loads. I was actually quite good at it. I remember I always used to go after those flying saucers in the distance, and I was one of the people who tried to get to the volcano that you can see in Battlezone. Now, Rommel's Revenge is a Battlezone clone. It plays very similar to Battlezone. There are some subtle differences, but yeah, it's pretty much Battlezone on the Spectrum. And the thing I really like about Rommel's Revenge, and the thing that I think makes it the best Battlezone game on the Spectrum, is the speed at which it whips along. The animation is really quick. As you turn and move, it goes along really fast. In fact, when I loaded this back up into the emulator and started playing it, I had to check that I hadn't ramped up the speed in the emulator, just because of how quick the graphics were going. Now, like Battlezone, you have a radar at the top of your view where you can see where other tanks are, and you have sights which show you when they're locked on an enemy or nearly locked on an enemy. There are various things in the way of your tank, and actually, strangely enough, if anything, in Rommel's Revenge they're better than in Battlezone, because in Battlezone they tended just to be geometric shapes. There were cubes and pyramids and things like that in Battlezone, whereas in Rommel's Revenge there are things like telegraph poles and radar dishes that spin. There is, of course, the volcano as well in Rommel's Revenge that erupts in the background, and like Battlezone, I have tried to reach it and you can't. One thing I really like about this game is the white on blue. It looks really good. It's quite bright and garish, but makes this game stand out a lot. The original Battlezone, of course, was green, was a monochrome green for Battlezone. I don't know if they used coloured gels to change that slightly in the arcade game. It's a long time since actually I've seen an arcade Battlezone, but I really like the colouring on Rommel's Revenge and the way it works. And it's quite a difficult game. The tanks, especially later on, are quite hard to kill and will zoom in at you and zap you, as they put it. You've been zapped is what you see when you get killed in Rommel's Revenge. So that's it, the last game in the list. My number 81 game is Rommel's Revenge. So the final countdown for this section goes as follows. 90 is Frenzy, 89 Fred, 88 Finders Keepers, 87 Mad Martha, 86 Robocop, 85 Styx, 84 Scuba Dive, 83 Robin of the Wood, 82 Renegade, and my number 81 game is Rommel's Revenge. I hope you enjoyed that list. Next time it will be numbers 80 to 71. Until then, happy gaming!